So I actually care more about my employees than I do even my customers, because I think that ultimately it is the most expensive mistake a company can make.
I recently joined Sidebar and I have to share my experience with you. Sidebar is a leadership program that accelerates your career. The program is designed for the world's most dynamic leaders and professionals who want to do more, do it better, and do it faster. Sound like you? It's like having your own personal board of directors made up of brilliant industry leaders. Sidebar found me a great match with a highly vetted and supportive peer group. We meet bi-weekly to discuss my challenges as an entrepreneur and builder. Every call has been impactful, helping me navigate my next steps and blockers. Peer groups provide accountability, diverse perspectives, and raw feedback, which is the most important, and everything is confidential. The best part is Sidebar runs the program and you just show up. They have the tech, the people, and the processes to drive impact and growth. Professional facilitators lead you and your peer group through a research-based curriculum that unlocks specific insights from each group. Learning from other people's experiences has been so valuable. By joining Sidebar, you are better prepared to face complex challenges, advance in your career, and make a bigger impact. Jump the growing waitlist of thousands of senior leaders waiting to join Sidebar and build your board of directors by visiting sidebar.com/she'sinteresting. That's sidebar.com/she'sinteresting. Welcome to She's Interesting, a podcast for women over 30 on business, money, and well-being. I'm your host, Rashel Hariri. Today, we have a very fun and exciting guest here, Fatima Zaidi.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, as always.
Fatima is the CEO and founder of Quill Inc., a full-service podcasting hosting platform and production agency which supports brands in launching their podcasts. She is a member of the National Speakers Bureau, and she's spoken at various events around the world on media trends, the importance of creating diverse and inclusive culture at work, leading her to keynote on world stages alongside speakers like Gary Vee, Arlene Dickinson, and most recently, Richard Branson. In addition to being a commentator for BNN Bloomberg on tech trends, she is a frequent contributor to publications like the Globe and Mail, the Huffington Post, and her company Quill has been featured in publications like Forbes, Entrepreneur, Business Insider, and Inc. Over the past few years, she has won several awards, Top 30 Under 30 Awards, Veuve Clicquot's Bold Future Award, the Women in Content Marketing Award, and has been named as Young Professional of the Year by Notable Life, and one of Flair Magazine's Top 100 Women. Fatima is the co-chair of Tech for Sick Kids Council for Sick Kids Hospital, which is the second largest pediatric research hospital in the world. And she's also a professor at the University of Toronto. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for the kind intro. I do really feel like I need to rework that bio. It just feels like it's very listicle.
But it's good because I think it's good to just have your accomplishments out there. And if it happens to be a list of shit that you've done, then bravo.
You know, it's really interesting. I was speaking at an event yesterday and this sort of concept of are women too promotional came up. And I find that it's often the women in our industries that are so scared of like promoting themselves, putting themselves out there. And the way that I've always looked at it is if I don't advocate for myself, if I don't, promote myself, nobody else will. And there is a direct sort of pipeline of the promotion tying down to our bottom line for our business. So I think it's important to take credit for your ideas and put your hands up and promote. And I think that not everyone feels the same way.
Yeah, I think that I'm 100% aligned with you. No one is going to promote the hell out of you like you will yourself. And it goes back to that whole saying of if you don't ask, the answer is always no. If you don't promote yourself, the answer is always going to be no. Speaking opportunities, business opportunities, no one's going to know what you're up to. I think the more that we're just comfortable with saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm not trying to humble brag and I'm not trying to like take over everything. I'm just letting you know, like, this is how I am. This is what I do and I'm great.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that imposter syndrome, totally normal, totally relevant. Everyone feels it. But if you don't put your hand up because you don't think you're qualified or good enough, then there's going to be 10 men right next to you who definitely will put up their hands. So.
Yeah, and they'll have some Patagonia vests on for sure. Okay. All right, let's get into it. So I want to start from your early days because I think we've given everybody sort of like an overview of what you've been up to in your career, but you actually grew up, you were born in Oman and you grew up there, and then you moved to Canada for post-secondary school. And I can't help but wonder if exposure to these different cultures, and you mentioned earlier before the podcast started that your parents lived in a lot of countries. So how has this exposure to different cultures and countries and continents shaped your understanding of entrepreneurship and how you see women in business?
It's a really interesting question. So I was born and raised in Oman. My parents are Pakistani and I'm a Canadian citizen. So by sort of proxy, I was a third culture kid and grew up as an expat. And I think the school that I went to, the international school I went to in Oman, I had 67 nationalities in just my class. So my friends, my closest friends today are scattered all over the world, completely diverse in different backgrounds. And I think it really did give me a little bit of an edge as an entrepreneur because I do feel like I can connect with and relate to almost anyone and everyone. They don't have to be from a similar walk or path of life. I don't have to agree with them. And in fact, I would say that I almost don't think about the differences day to day. I got asked recently, how is your team so diverse? Like, are you using a recruitment firm? Is it something that you think about intentionally? And the answer is no, I don't think about it intentionally. In fact, I don't think about it at all. I just hire the person that is best for the job. And that just so happens to create the genetic makeup of a very diverse team.
How do you approach recruitment for your company? Because I know you guys are one of the top growing companies in Canada. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Do you have recruiters that you work with? Is it you start with your network first? I think it's good to share just for anybody else whose business is growing and scaling, but also for anyone who's potentially looking for a job.
We don't work with recruiters. I feel like it's so much work though. So maybe I should. If I was going to work with the recruitment team, it would be creative niche. But I would say that the interesting thing is at Quill, nobody's ever left. Like we've been around officially since 2019 and none of our employees have ever left.
That's amazing.
We keep growing. There's no turnover. And I think that the reason nobody has left is we are so slow to hire because it's about culture. Like I am so careful about who I bring into the company because they have to fit a certain profile in terms of just being a team player and like what we look for in our employees, which honestly is very little to do with the resume. We care about things like resilience, grit. Are you a team player? Can you collaborate well? Do you have an ego? And are you also qualified for the job? We've actually hired a ton of immigrants and also third culture kids. And I think that's been really interesting for the team to get perspective into different ways of doing things and different backgrounds and life experiences. But we are really slow to hire. And then when we do hire you, we put all of our eggs in your basket. So I actually care more about my employees than I do even my customers, because I think that ultimately it is the most expensive mistake a company can make, not investing in their employees from an early day, because that turnover is going to cost you a lot of money.
When you bring on new employees, it can take them sometimes 6 months to get acquainted with your company, the way things work. And then to put all that time and energy and money into the wrong person who's going to churn. And then you have to start that cycle all over again. It's exhausting. So kudos to you for having figured out what the right framework is for your business so that you can actually keep your employees long-term, keep them happy. And it seems like leading as a woman entrepreneur, leading in a collaborative environment and bringing diverse perspectives together is something that a lot of other business owners could learn from. Because what I see a lot in the tech space, especially, is a lot of likeness. So starting from the top of the company, it's the same type of look, the same type of speaking, the same like background, whether it's the same workplaces that they've come from or educational backgrounds. There's a lot of likeness that sticks together. And I love the fact that you're leading with diversity and culture first.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the teams that I sort of interact with on a day-to-day basis in the tech community, they're very homogenous looking and acting. And I think that that's what makes it so fun. I think that's the reason we're doing so well as a company is that everyone brings a different perspective and unique skill set to the table and a different way of doing things. And we're not all the same. And actually those differences are very much celebrated.
I wonder if there's any connections between what you've seen in your career, because you started in HR and then you went into sales and then you started your own business, how any of that experience impacted how you built your business today and what you look for in your team.
I can't believe that I started my career in HR. Like, what a joke. If anyone knows me at all today, they're like, well, how were you the person that was supposed to be diplomatic and politically correct and enforcing rules? I'm like the worst person to enforce rules. And I think that that's just, it would be very much a fraud to my personal brand if I had stayed in HR. I actually did HR. Like many of us, we fall into the trap of like whatever we studied in school, we sort of just fall into that because we think that that's all we can do. And so I started my career in HR because when I was at U of T, I was in the commerce program and I specialize in employment relations. And I thought, well, this is what I have to do with my career because this is what I went to school for, not realizing. And I wish someone had told me that I have very traditional parents.
Yeah.
My mom is a stay-at-home mom and caregiver to her children who she raised. And my dad worked for the government. So the concept of like being an entrepreneur, working at a startup, which is considered so risky, that just didn't exist. You get a corporate job and you climb up the corporate ladder, and that's only if you can't become a lawyer, doctor, one of those sort of like flashy careers. I could definitely not be any of those things. So I started my career in HR and I started working at a couple of energy companies and Thomson Reuters and realized I absolutely hated it. I was not good at my job and ended up pivoting into sales. And honestly, it was a really good move for me because I think sales is really transferable into entrepreneurship. And there's one of two skills I think that can really give you a competitive advantage if you're starting a company. One is being like a technical coder. If you can build a technology, that is a huge asset. You're saving yourself a lot of capital. I couldn't do that either. So B, I can sell. And so the sales skills that I sort of brought with me in my career, I worked at lots of startups, helping them scale from zero to multi-million in MRR. And that was really helpful when I was launching Quill.
That's amazing. When you started in sales, is it something that came naturally to you? Like, did you have to build certain skill sets? Because sales is not easy. It's a very hard environment to be in. You hear no a lot. There's a lot of rejection. So are there any tactical things that you had to do to prepare yourself? Or was it just like learning while you're on the job and then also a mix of just your personality and grit that you have?
I think it's a combination of the two. There's a little bit of an art and science. I think the science component can be taught, how to navigate CRM tools, how to optimize your sales pipeline, figuring out algorithms, because a lot of it is math and approaching quotas analytically, how to, pull reporting functions and then use that data to tweak your sales strategy and ABM testing strategy. So yeah, some of it is technical that you can learn on the job, but honestly, 80% of it is building long-standing relationships. So I've done all kinds of sales, door to door, phone calls, outbound, relationship management, like all kinds of sales. I would say the hardest type of sales is agency sales. So when I joined 88 and worked alongside Aaron, that was a really interesting experience because there was very little science. We weren't getting a lot of inbound. There was no ads being put towards driving people in. There was no SEO and content generation work. There was no paid strategy behind bringing in leads. So I was 100% responsible for going out there and bringing in clients. And you can only do that through, speaking, op-eds, being out there in the community, one handshake at a time. And then most importantly, building very solid relationships. And that's not easy because you're playing the long game. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about your approach to sales at 88, what's like the craziest thing you did to try to close a sale?
Oh my goodness. We've done some pretty crazy things. Though there was a Warby Parker stunt that we did, which Warby Parker was coming to Canada from the States. They were launching like their Canadian division. And so we created a poster with Canadian celebrities, Justin Bieber, Margaret Atwood, Chris Hadfield, Pamela Anderson. And we put Warby Parker glasses on them. And then
I like that.
and we said the tagline was Warby Parker looks good in Canada. And then we like did a whole campaign around this, like Warby Parker looks good in Canada. And it was just to get their attention. And it definitely did. Their social team reached out and we were able to generate a ton of buzz just around that creative campaign. And that was the kind of stuff that we did. There was another campaign that we did with Fedora, the food delivery company. And we brought in a sexologist and we partnered with, I believe it was Durex, where anytime someone ordered off the food app for Valentine's Day, they would get a little package from Durex of condoms and some other like sort of giveaways. And it was just like happy Valentine's Day from Fedora and Durex. We've taken care of the food. You take care of the rest. And it was like really cheeky. It was cute, but people just for the novelty of it, like they got so many. It was such a successful campaign.
Yeah. I love that because it's creative. And I think that that's something people often forget about when they're thinking if it's sales, they're just thinking you're numbers driven, people driven. But a lot of what supports sales can help you from the marketing side, can help you from the creative side where you're like, how do we actually turn this into a campaign to lock in this client so that we can
Totally.
showcase what we actually do for them? And that's what's going to get them to bite.
Yeah, I think people just don't realize that so much of sales is being at the right place at the right time, being top of mind and topical. Like I'm not sitting here reaching out to every single person being like, "Hey, do you need a podcast?" It's more so being top of mind so that when somebody needs a podcast, they remember to reach out to you. And that's usually how we get most of our sales. It's people reaching out to me. Or my team being like, we see you out there in the community all the time, and we know that this is something that you're good at. Sometimes we get creative. I mean, if we have this thing that sometimes we'll send with our proposal, we'll send a pizza delivery to whoever it is that we're presenting the proposal to, so we can have lunch and present at the same time, or a bottle of wine. And we do get creative. We definitely do think of out of the box ways to stay like memorable, especially because there's a lot of competitive agencies out there. But ultimately, I would say we let the work speak for itself, but we also build relationships.
And would you say that PR is a big part of your strategy, or especially in the early days when you were first launching Quill? Did you do the PR yourself? Did you hire an agency? What's your advice for any women or men that are listening right now and are starting a business and they maybe don't have the funds to do ads, but they might have some money for PR? What's the best approach here?
I have no background in marketing, but it's funny because everyone seems to think that I do. Everyone's always like, "Yeah, your background is in marketing." I'm like, "No, it wasn't."
I thought so too.
I know you did too, and I was like, "No, it's actually not true. I've never specialized in marketing. I've never like specialized in PR, but I have done all of Quill's PR by myself." So you do not need to hire a fancy agency. I think if you're at a point where you can, then absolutely outsource the work. There's some amazing, incredible media relations teams out there, but to this day, I have 100% done Quill's PR by myself. And it's honestly not rocket science. It's about everything else that a founder has to figure out along the way. It's just a matter of figuring out what kind of a pitch is timely and topical, who the right contact or journalist is at a particular publication that you're trying to pitch. It's a matter of just emailing them and also realizing, and this is where sales comes in. I'm so used to rejection. Like I'll get like 20 no's before I get a maybe. I'll get like 50 no's before I get a yes. I'm so used to it, I don't even think about it. I don't take it personally. And it's the same thing with media relations pitching. I have so many people reach out. They're like, "What PR agency do you use?" Or "What's your PR strategy?" I'm like, my strategy is hounding these journalists until I wear them down. So they'll get 30 emails, ignore 29 of them, but then the 30th email, they'll be like, "Okay, let's pick this pitch up and do a story."
I love that. And I just want to reiterate the fact that you said you'll get like 20, you'll send them 29 contacts. The 30th is when they respond. Because I think oftentimes people forget the hustle that's required to get in front of people and to get their attention. Everyone is busy. Everyone's doing multiple things at once. We're either going into holiday season or the summer season, or there's always something that's there to distract them, and also people's full-time jobs. And so when you're pitching, I think making something that's memorable, sending a pitch that's going to make you stand out, and then just that regular follow-up is such a big no, because oftentimes people are like, "Well, nobody got back to me, so I guess that's a no.
This
Move on to the
journalist will
next."
never respond. Like that's not true. The other thing is, and people never do this, also appreciating when they do decide to pick your story up and then maybe sending them a little something as a thank you afterwards. Like even just like taking the time to not make it so transactional. And like if they decide to profile you or even just respond with a, "This isn't a good fit right now." Because I know journalists are getting bombarded with thousands of emails a day. So the fact that they take a minute to respond and say, "This isn't the right angle, looking for something like this in the future," that is invaluable feedback and deserves a handwritten thank you note at the very least.
One strategy as well is you're emailing them, but also see where else they spend their time. Are they on Twitter? Are they on Instagram?
Yeah.
How can you find these people? Do you know someone else that knows them that can maybe do an introduction for you? There's a lot of ways to be resourceful if we want to be, and there's a lot of ways to feel defeated if you also want to live that way too.
I think the problem is, and it's become especially tough after COVID, all of us can run our businesses from our couches without ever having to interact with the outside world. We've almost lost that sense of like humanization or connection. And yes, online tactics are more scalable. It's easier to be in your sweats and working on content generation and running ads and not have to go out there, network, and interact with the world. But honestly, I've built my entire network one handshake at a time. And I think offline tactics have the power of forming much stronger relationships.
Did you also always have a a desire to be an entrepreneur? Like, I know you started in HR and that was your focus at the time, but had you, while you were growing up, like, what was your vision of your future like? And how does it line up with where you are today? Was entrepreneurship like never something that crossed your mind or something that you had considered?
It actually never did cross my mind, only because I had no access and exposure to it. Like I mentioned, my parents come from very traditional backgrounds. And in my mind, being an entrepreneur was super risky. In my mind, and granted, it does come with some risk. In my mind, being an entrepreneur also meant no job stability or security. And even working at a startup, forget entrepreneurship, even working at a startup wasn't stability in my head. And you didn't, you were just, trying to make ends meet. And most companies, it was just like a 50-50 chance of whether or not they'd survive. And I think that my lack of knowledge in that space was directly impacted to the fact that I had no exposure to the world. And I was working at a corporate company, and I reached out to one of my sister's best friends, Erin Burry, who is the founder and CEO of Willful. And I met her for coffee, and I was miserable at my job, my corporate job. And it just wasn't making sense. And she's wise beyond her years. So we had a long conversation. And at the end, she said, just based on this conversation, I think that you do not have the DNA for a corporate company. I think you have the DNA of an entrepreneur. And I was like, okay, well, that's not going to happen. I have like zero dollars to my name right now. And she said, well, have you considered joining a startup and learning on their dime? And I was like, well, a startup is so risky. And she's like, actually, that's far from the truth. And so we left, and I, walked away feeling pretty inspired to make a career change. And then a few weeks later, she called me and she said, hey, I have two friends who are starting a dress rental company, a spinoff of Rent the Runway, and they're looking for a third partner to come on and run sales. Are you interested? That is how my career in startup started, and entrepreneurship. And then a couple of years after, a couple of sort of job experience after that, I decided to launch Quill.
It's crazy to think that one reach out that you had, like one coffee chat, completely helped you change your mindset about career and life and was such a guide for you to take off and to do all of these different things. Was there any like mental work that you needed to do yourself? Any like mindset training just to get prepared to be in that environment? Or are you the type of person who's like, okay, I've made up my mind, I'm doing this, and we're going all in?
I think that if I could do it again, honestly, I'm pretty happy with how things turned out.
Yeah, it's great.
But if I had to go back and do it again, I think I would have done it earlier. I did the startup circuit for a bit too long, and I was scared. I was scared to take the plunge because I thought like I needed XYZ skills, and I wanted to completely de-risk myself. And I think now in learning, I've realized that actually every entrepreneur figures it out on the job, and your challenges never look the same. So you cannot anticipate what your needs are going to be. You cannot anticipate what your problems are going to be. And so there's almost no point worrying about those variables. It's like Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000-hour rule. You do something enough times, you become the expert at it. When I launched Quill, I was not a podcasting expert. I am now, but I wasn't when I started. What I was good at is sales. What I was good at is thinking about like a long-term vision, a business plan, scale. But I certainly did not have the skill sets to produce a strong show. So I ended up acquiring a company that I knew was really strong in that category. But I just don't think that you need to start a business and be an expert right away. I think you can learn on the job and over time become a subject matter expert.
For sure. And when this idea came to you for Quill, because I'm a big believer that when an idea comes to you, it's meant for you. Like it didn't go to your sister, it didn't go to Erin. This idea to start this business came to you. And so what was your first step while you were already working, and then the idea for this podcasting agency came to you? What's the first step that you took? And the reason why I ask this question is because I know a lot of people are listening that might be in corporate jobs or in a startup who've always wanted to have their own business, who have tons of ideas that are coming to them. But sometimes it's the challenge of knowing what's your first step. Like, what's the first thing you do to catapult this adventure?
So I think that I really disagree with the tactic that you need a lot of capital to start a business, or any capital to be frank. I think that this government can give you a ton of grant funding, especially if you're a woman. And so I think there's a lot that you can tap into before thinking about raising capital. And that's usually people's first step is like, I need to go out and raise a business. Well, hang on. Does your business actually need capital? Can you bootstrap this? So that would be sort of like my first like mindset switch is like, don't even think about the money part. Think of how can you prove market traction with like the least amount of funds possible? I would say the first thing is, and it's interesting because you can put together a loose business plan, but I don't necessarily think that that is something that would help me. Put together an advisory board of people who can guide you along the way, each step. And then don't think that you have to go all in immediately. I was at 88 for 2 years working on Quill before I decided to leave and launch it. So this is the other thing, like you have to go all in and put all of your money, mortgage your house. No, gone are the days where you have to be so risky with your career transitions. And I think that's actually what holds people back from being an entrepreneur, because they're like, well, we can't just like go all in, and we have a mortgage and we have children. And of course, and I think that it's completely possible to do well in your day job, which is your 9 to 5, and then work on your side hustle on the side in the evenings, on the weekends. And then when you're ready to start monetizing, then make the switch so it isn't so risky. And I'm curious what your story is in terms of like what made you decide you wanted to be an entrepreneur, because you also come from a background of like you worked at Shopify and McDonald's and you were super corporate, and then what all of a sudden you decided to transition. And I'm curious what like sparked that inspiration.
I've always wanted to do something on my own. So growing up, when my parents were in Iran, my dad was an entrepreneur and he started an elevator business, and he had connections with companies in Italy and Spain. And so I had heard all about this. I still have some of the blueprints from like the elevator things that he'd created. And so in the back of my mind as a kid, I always was like, one day I'll have my own business. So I'll do my own thing. I just didn't know what it was. Like no ideas had come to me. I didn't have that spark or interest. I just knew I wanted to. And so throughout my career, I loved my jobs. I worked at places that enabled me to learn and to test and experiment and try new things and build. Every job I've had, I started from like zero and helped them build it up and move to the next place. And so when I landed at Shopify, it was perfect. It was in the closest I would get to all of these entrepreneurs, all of these brilliant people that are starting businesses. And in fact, they actually pushed you to start a business because they're like, if you're going to work for us, you need to know what it's like to be a D2C brand founder. And so that was the last piece to the puzzle I think that I needed to push me over the edge, because I was there for 2.5 years. I worked with some incredible founders, and I thought I'd rather work directly with founders and have a vision and build the vision versus working for a company that had scaled to 10,000 employees at the time. I just felt like one of many. And so that's the thing that pushed me to start new ventures and then to go and start consulting and then eventually end up here with this podcast.
I think honestly, that's so interesting to hear that Shopify really encouraged that journey, because I find most companies don't support side hustles. 88 did. And that's why I had the flexibility and freedom to work on Quill. And I certainly encouraged that at Quill and Co-Host. Both companies were very big on please have your own side hustles. Like I would love for people to graduate from my company and to know that we help them get to the next stage of their life, which is like hopefully entrepreneurship and being empowered for your own career path. But I feel like it's very hard for companies to like get behind that mindset.
Yeah. I think oftentimes there's like when you work at companies that are a little too traditional, the type of companies that don't like remote work, the type of companies that like if your butt's not in the seat, then they feel like you're not doing work.
Oh my gosh.
Those ones, they have a fear of entrepreneurial people because there's like I feel like they almost think that they can't control you.
Yes.
And this person's wild and they're going to have these crazy ideas and do things. And I think that's where it comes from. These companies want control. And I remember when I worked at McDonald's, it was perfect for me because I worked in this corporate environment, but I was on the digital team, which was there to transform McDonald's. And so we were like this little agency within the company who were constantly testing and pushing the boundaries and trying new things, which was great because like, sure, we would get in trouble a lot because we were doing a lot of things sometimes like not going through the proper processes, but it was a great environment for me to be like, okay, in a corporate space, I get to test, I get to experiment, I get to use corporate dollars to do all of these interesting things and then move on from there. And I think for anyone who is in an environment where maybe it feels a little bit corporate, my advice is look for ways that you can still test, experiment, and learn on the job. The point of you being there isn't just to tick the boxes for your boss every day and go home. What are you learning in that environment? What are you building for yourself that is going to set you up for the next thing you're going to do?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that there's something for everyone. Some people want to go in there and do their 9 to 5 and they like the structure and the routine and being one of many. And I couldn't personally do it. I just can't. Like if I had to go back to corporate, I think I would be homeless. But I appreciate that we're not all the same and that we're not all clamoring to be entrepreneurs and we're not all clamoring to be in the corporate space.
Yeah.
I do remember your work for McDonald's though. And that's how you were on my radar. You put out some of the most creative marketing campaigns.
Thank you.
It was like, I think the most I've ever eaten McDonald's in my life. And I'm like not even a huge McDonald's person, but I do remember the very creative campaigns that went out.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And that's exactly it. During that time, I was like, I'm here. I want to experiment. I want to test. I want to try new things. And oftentimes too, what I'd say for anyone who's feeling a little bit stuck in their work has to do with your boss as well. Like I had an incredible boss who was like, we're just going to do shit. And if you get in trouble, let me know. Like that was the vibe on the team. And I also think that's what kept me there for so long. It's kind of like what you offered to your employees. It's a good cultural environment that lets you grow and learn and have autonomy. And then once you get to a certain point where you're like, I've done everything I can here, it's time for me to move on. Then, people leave the company and it makes sense, but you're not getting a high turnover because the environment is difficult or the work is not challenging.
Right.
You talked a little bit about government grants and looking for investment or looking for funding in the non-traditional ways of going straight to a VC. What was your experience like? Did you automatically go straight for Canadian government grants? Did you try the VC route? What was your experience like?
When I started Quill, one of my really close friends had joined like an online wills company and she was in the process of pitching investors. And honestly, it's a pretty demoralizing and disheartening experience to watch someone go through that. You're spending so much of your time pitching your business to people who know nothing about your business. And then they are evaluating whether or not your company is going to succeed and whether it's worth anything. I can think of nothing worse. And given my entrepreneurial mindset, the thought of walking into a room and somebody telling me that I can't get this off the ground or I can't be successful is infuriating, especially when they know nothing about this space. And so I did pitch a few investors in the early days just to see what it was like. And I would have to say, like, it's pretty grim. And all the stories that you hear in the news and media about how hard it is for women, especially women of color, to get capital investment, all fair. I would get tons of calls from Canadian VC companies. And they were all calling me because they wanted to fill a quota. And it was very clear that it was a diversity checkbox because they are mandated to have a certain amount of calls with female founders who you're very different and don't fit the stereotypical box of typically what they invest in. So all these VC companies have these mandates now. And so what their investors started doing is like booking a ton of meetings with female founders, but really wasting their time. And they knew in that first meeting, it was clear to me that they had no intention of investing, that they were not interested. They just wanted to get on a call with you so that they could say, we did our due diligence, but still give the funding to someone who looked or sounded like the part of what they thought constituted as a successful investor. So I did that like 4 times before I caught on that this was what was happening. And then I stopped.
What a joke.
It's such a joke. It's so infuriating. And I watched a lot of my friends go through this process. And eventually they did raise funding, but it was like after a year of pitching. And so what I ended up doing is I took all of that time and I started pitching customers instead. So every minute that I could have spent pitching investors for some cash flow, I started pitching customers instead. And actually, because of that, we were cash flow positive from day one. So
that's amazing.
We didn't need the outside capital. I did have a ton of help though from the Canadian government. We had Shred, we had IRAP. So if you're a Canadian founder that's building a new technology in Canada, which we were, and granted, I would say 80% of our customers are in the US or global, but we're a Canadian company. We have not offshored.
Okay.
So because of that, Shred and IRAP, they've given us so much money. And then Can Exports, COJG, OCI, the Career Foundation, Ontario Job Grants. Like there is a whole, I just won the TELUS grant competition. I just got some money from them.
I mean, wait, even to this day, you're still...
Oh, 100%. I get $500,000 in funding a year in grant funding.
That's fucking amazing.
Yeah, even till this day, we are making multi-millions in revenue. And even to this day, I tap into all of the grants. In fact, the more money your business makes, the more they give back to you because they realize it's helping you scale. You've proven traction. So actually, the hardest time to get grant funding is in the beginning when you actually don't have traction. You can still get some. I mean, we definitely did Can Export, COJG, the OCI grant. Futurepreneur was another loan that we took, and they give you like 10 years to pay it back. So I tapped into all of that and it helped me kickstart the business. And then as we started making more, we started making even more money. And so, yeah, between $250,000 to $500,000 a year in grant funding.
That is amazing. I hope that, like, if there's one thing that you guys take away from this interview, it is literally that you have to advocate for yourself and you have to go there and get the money. And the fact that what I love the most is you're saying you're making multi-millions and you're still taking that grant money.
Oh,
that
100%.
is like, why the hell not? And I don't know why more people don't do this. And I think it might just be like the grant process of having to go through that. And that's why. But at the end of the day,
money. It's
$500,000.
Exactly. I mean, these are contract sizes. It's the same as like pitching to customers and going through the customer journey. And it's interesting because so many of these grant programs that we apply with are like starving for more applications. They're like, we have so much budget and no one's applying. So I think just a lot of times people don't take the initiative. For those who are listening, I actually started for female founders in my network or anyone who's like new to the space. I started a master sheet of all the grants that are out there and that I know of. And lots of details, due dates, everything, all the information is there and it's open to anyone. So if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Rashel, I will pass it along, tap into it, use it, pass it along to your female founders. I think anytime I open this sheet, there's like hundreds of people in it. So I think it's really made its rounds.
That's amazing. What we can do as well is just like, we're going to have a landing page for you. We can put a link to it as well and everyone can get access. But
excellent.
I love this. This got me so excited. I'm like, I'm going to go after this podcast and look up all these grant programs. Why the fuck not?
Yeah, why the hell not? And I think if anything you can do to retain the majority of your equity in your business, and I'm not saying don't raise capital. I just think that people should consider raising capital once they are cash flow positive and can get a better valuation. And I think the process is much easier than when you're new out of the gate as a fresh entrepreneur. It's a very demoralizing process to go through it the first time. And I will say I did have some help. I had a friend who gave me some money at ideation, literally just handed it to me. It was a little bit of capital. I blew through it in like a couple of months on like the first phase of Quill, which was a marketplace app, which did not succeed. So we pivoted into the agency and then the new product, which succeeded. So this is another lesson for me is don't take people's money if you aren't sure how you're going to spend it and turn it into more money. Now it's fine because she's obviously going to make a really great killing off of the percentage that I gave her. But it was pretty touch and go for a little while there.
Yeah. How did you pivot? Like you were starting with an app, you said, and then you pivoted to the agency. That's quite a difference. What was it during that process that gave you that aha moment where you're like, this is not working. We need to let go of this app?
This is another thing that I think not a lot of people talk about. I actually have two of the dragons are my advisors, but one of them in particular is like very vocal about her failures. And she explained to me in the early days that firstly, she launched like 5 companies before like her 6th was successful. And then the 6th company had maybe 7 different iterations of the product before they found something that stuck with the market. And so I am not afraid of just starting and figuring it out. And if the market is telling you, and honestly, the easiest way to know if something's working or not is cash flow. If someone's not willing to pay for it, that is your answer.
There's your sign.
That's your sign. If someone's not willing to sign a contract and give you a significant amount of money for it, and you're having to chase after lead with no traction, you should pivot very quickly. And in that experience, there will be key learnings. So if I hadn't launched the marketplace, I learned very quickly that wasn't going to succeed. I think we were live for like 6 months and it was a grind because with marketplaces, firstly, it's two-sided. So you're thinking of supply and you're thinking of demand. And if that wasn't hard enough, you're only getting a 20% cut. So let's just say there was a $10,000 transaction on the account. You're only getting 20% of that. Think about the volume of sales you have to be doing in order for that to mean something. Companies like Uber and Airbnb and Expedia, like it takes a lot of capital for those companies to succeed. However, the one thing that I did realize from the marketplace is that production was a big need. The producers on our app were the ones who were making the most money, and they were the ones who were getting the most repeat clientele and the most retention. And so that is what gave me the idea. I was like, you know what we should do is we should go and launch a full service production agency that works with branded podcasts and also markets those shows. That's how
Genius.
Quill was launched. And I would have never done that if I hadn't realized through the marketplace that was a gap in the market.
Yeah, I think as an entrepreneur, you definitely listened to where the demand was coming from and what's happening in the marketplace. And for anyone who's just kicking off an idea right now, just keep in mind that in a year from now, what you thought your business would look like could be completely different. And it doesn't mean it's a failure. It's actually a success if you're listening and you're evolving. If you stay the same and you're not growing and you're not getting the sales that you want, that's where you know something is wrong. And that's how you fail.
The most successful companies are still pivoting. Mm-hmm. Blockbuster didn't pivot, and that's why they went under. Disney decided to pivot, and that's how they're so successful. That's why I think Bob Iger is like such a damn genius, because nobody would have thought to do what he did with Disney. And I think that the most successful companies are paying attention to the market and moving with the market rather than being like, this is not how we've done it. Realizing actually this is where the industry is moving. We're still pivoting and we're like very successful from a revenue standpoint, but our product, we started with hosting and we're still doing hosting, but we realized there was a big gap in the market for people who wanted a prefix plugin to our product rather than being able to migrate over. And so now anyone can use our product without hosting with us. And we're constantly thinking of iterations like that.
Yeah, it's basically like pivot or die. Because those are your options. You either get with the program and you see how your business is going to change, or you stay the same, you stagnate, and then
eventually
you're
someone
done.
will do it better.
Yeah. So let's do a quick pivot here. I want to know your money mindset when it comes to your business and then personal life. And so when I say money mindset for business, like how do you set your goals for your business? How do you determine what the growth rate should be on a yearly basis? What seems reasonable to you? And the reason why I ask this is for anybody else who also works in tech who's heard the most ridiculous things like, we need to 10x this, because I used to hear that a lot and it doesn't make sense. How do you determine what a significant and like a plausible increase is for your business every year?
So money is like extremely important to me, and I'm very like money driven. Like I've always said, get rich or die trying is like my mantra in life. I actually have that framed in a plaque in my office.
Yeah.
My goals are very clear. Is like, that is it. And the other thing is we always say this at Quill, cash flow is king. Data is second, cash flow is king. The most important thing for me is being cash flow positive all the time. And I always say to my team, if I hear you guys arguing or debating something for more than 15 minutes, if it doesn't directly impact bottom line or our customers' experience, then I don't want to hear about it. Like, I'm not interested in this conversation. I don't care about the colors of the logo. I don't care about this marketing campaign that's going on with like the right brand guidelines. Like, I just don't care. So I think just having that mindset as a salesperson is like extremely important. And then in terms of growth, the reason that we made the Globes list this year is because we've actually grown like over 150% year after year. And I think the reason that we've done that is we've actually set very, very aggressive targets. I think that we're starting to realize that it isn't sustainable. Like, it's not possible to grow at that rate year after year. And so typically speaking, what we do is, and it's a bit of an algorithm, we figure out how many calls or emails we need to send in order to get X amount of meetings booked. And then the X amount of proposals sent. And then from that, how many say yes or close. So we realistically work backwards and we're like, okay, this is how many touch points we have to have before we close an account and how much is physically feasible. Our sort of growth rate is about 30% quarter after quarter. So that is what we're working with, 30% quarter after quarter, but it's so subjective to the industry. We're also coming off the back of a major recession. In fact, some would argue we're still in a pretty bad recession. And we work with Fortune 1000 brands. So we're working with the PwCs, the Expedias, the McKinseys, the Deloittes of the world. And unfortunately, these companies have gone through mass layoffs in the past couple of years. Marketing teams are usually the first to be let go. And so for us, we've just had to be like, let's pump the brakes a little bit in terms of growth and actually focus on being a better company. So now this year, it's just less about, do we need to have 200% growth? What if we just had a 60% growth this year? But the output and quality of work that we're putting out, and we're really focusing on innovation. So I think every year is very different. In the early years, we were very much focused on growth. And now we're like, how do we become the best agency and product company as possible?
You're again listening to the market, You're looking at all the external factors. We've seen so many layoffs over the last couple of years. And that was because people were too bullish on what was happening in the market, consumer spending. They weren't listening to the signals. And there's always a pendulum, right? Like it swings. Things can be really, really good, but you have to understand that it won't last. It won't stay there forever. It's going to swing back slightly and then it'll settle at some point. So I think that's really concrete advice to give to anyone is when you're setting up your goals for the year and we're closing off, we're getting to the end of the year, we're going into 2024, look at your business and look at what's happening in the economy and be smart about where you're spending, where you're growing, and then where you need to pull back for things that are unnecessary. That's where a lot of waste happens is when you're just working on things, to your point, spending too much time on the fluff that's not actually driving your bottom line or sales.
It's honestly, it's been a really tough year. And actually this summer was like really hard because it was the first time where I like actually was worried. And I've never experienced that at Quill. And you know what? I'm glad now that I'm kind of out of it and things are really busy again. I'm just like, I'm glad that we had a scary summer because it actually helped me take a beat and pause and realize that actually there are ebbs and flows in a business's cycle. And when it's an ebb rather than a flow, you have to really think about what variables can you control. And is there a point in worrying? Like, I can't control a global recession. I can't control that 80% of our clients are going through mass layoffs. What I can control is, are we the best agency possible? Are we doing the best job possible marketing ourselves? Are our ads campaigns super optimized? Do we have enough growth people on the team? So I took the summer to focus on those things. And now it's super busy again. And I'm like, oh, well, thank God I didn't spend that much time worrying about it. But it has been really scary to see that every day we wake up to like a new client being like, we've laid off our entire marketing team.
That's hard.
We'll be back, when we can. And we're just trying to give them the space to figure it out.
And how do you deal with your personal finances? On this podcast, I like to keep it real when it comes to money, what you're doing on the business side, but then on a personal side too. Because I think as women, we talk about so many things. We talk about skincare, we talk about sex, we talk about all of these things. But then when it comes to money and actually like getting ahead in life, that's like such a taboo. People don't feel comfortable. So I'm not going to ask you like how much money you're making, but what are your strategies for yourself? And I know you said you're money driven, so I think this is going to be a perfect question for you.
Yes, very money driven. Money is very important to me. It is arguably the most important thing. And I'm like not really ashamed to admit it.
I love that. Yeah.
Like if people are disagreeing and they say money can't buy you happiness, well, you should take a look at my shoe collection. It makes me very happy. I love taking all of those vacations. So I would argue that money gives you options and options are key to living a well-rounded life.
So money gives you that freedom.
100%. So here is like my money mindset. It is if you're the founder of your company, you should be the highest paid person. Like, who are you sacrificing your net worth for and why? You're the one who's working the hardest. You're assuming all of the risk. You're assuming all of the stress. That should equate to being the highest paid person. So don't be that like cash flow martyr by being like, I'm going to be the one who makes the least because that's what entrepreneurs should do. I think that is the most ridiculous sort of philosophy in entrepreneurship that the founder and CEO makes the least because they have to sacrifice. Like, why? Why do you have to sacrifice? So that would be my first thing. You should be the highest paid person at the company. My second thing is you should diversify your portfolio, which I think everyone should know. You should have multiple revenue streams. So speaking for me, I teach at U of T. I invest in assets. So like if you can and have the means to own a home, obviously have like a stock portfolio. So try to diversify your assets wherever you can. And then if you can, and if you have the means to, I would say, take a little bit of your budget and put it away for that risky investment, whether that's investing in a friend's company, whether that's purchasing stocks for a company that you think is going to blow up, whether that's investing in a second side hustle on the side that somebody else is going to run, like whatever it is, putting together a bit of an experimental budget, because more often than not, that experimental budget is the thing that's going to skyrocket, but you just wouldn't know. And so like everything in life, diversify your options. Money should be no different.
Yeah. I think that's really solid advice is have all the basics and the foundations. And then that experimental budget is not something that I hear a lot of people talk about. I feel like I hear a lot of, well, I have my investments and I diversify and then I have my savings and I have like this big amount of money that I'm just holding on to for retirement. But I mean, if you want to grow that retirement money, the best way to do that is have these experiments, put it in people that you trust, put it in entrepreneurs that have a success rate. And like, hey, if I give this person 20K, 10K, whatever it is that you can set aside, they're more likely to triple or quadruple that than just leaving it in a savings account at like whatever percent.
Yeah. And sometimes, honestly, it'll go bust. Like I just invested a lot of money in a company called Field Trip Health. It's a psychedelics company. And honestly, I really believed in what they were doing, but I think they were too early in the market. Lost all of that money recently. The stock market went to zero. And you know what? That's okay because, you build that reserve back up and then you invest in something else. And maybe that'll be the idea that takes off. This is like less money related, but I think it has a direct impact on money. I think also finding ways to give back financially, like having a portion of your funds where you're investing in a charity, doing good, raising funds for world disasters, crises, whatever is happening, whatever you're passionate about. I have found that doing that and doing that very proactively has made money come back full circle. I don't know if that's like an energy thing or a karmic debt thing, but
absolutely,
it has helped.
It's definitely like when you talked about this on the episode with Eva Lau, where she said the most thought-provoking thing, which was, you are a custodian when it comes to money. And she's like, it's how you use that money, the energy you put into it, how you give it away and how you service that money that really determines what your life is going to be made of. And so I absolutely agree. I think putting that money aside and giving it to good causes and having you're working so much for yourself, you're building so much. And it's like, what are you doing for your community and how are you being of service to others? You don't always have to volunteer if you don't have the time or the hours. But if you can write a check that is going to go to the right people with the right cause, that's amazing. And also that you get, like that credit back.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And I honestly think credit or no credit usually comes back full circle. And I think those are the three sort of money mindsets or mantras that I live by. Get rich, die trying, be the highest paid person at the company if you're the founder, diversify where you're putting your money, have an experimental budget, and then give back to the community.
And I hope that everyone that was listening today is really taking notes, especially all those government grants that you listed. Write those down. We're also going to get you guys a URL so that you can get the money yourself and start applying. Fatima, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think this conversation was energizing. I feel good. I'm like ready to go kick ass for the rest of my day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be here. And I'm honestly so impressed with everything you've built. This is like a really good show. And I have a podcast production agency. I can get behind this show.
You heard it here, guys. She said it's great. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for tuning in and listening. Today's episode was absolutely energizing, and I hope that you guys have some huge takeaways from it. So as always, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at she'sinteresting.com and to follow us on Instagram. And do not forget to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or basically on all the streaming platforms. And make sure to rate and review because it really helps out the pod. So thank you. Thank you.